a very, very warm welcome to today's Action for Happiness event on the theme of everyday mindfulness with a great friend of our community and someone who's a real hero to me, Jon Kabat-Zinn. Jon, it's so lovely to be with you again. Thank you so much for making time for us today.
Thank you, Mark. It's great to be here, and hello to everybody who's on this call together.
So, for those of you who are new to this, welcome to an Action for Happiness community gathering. This is a movement of people from all around the world living in a way that tries to create a happier and kinder world together. Thank you so much to all of you who are joining again. It's fantastic to see thousands of you here from all around the world. And as ever, we'll be supporting each other in the chat and keeping it kind and relevant as always. And there's a chance for you later on to ask Jon some questions. So please do use the Q&A function. And I'm really looking forward to this time together, particularly to reconnect with you, Jon, and to hopefully remind all of us about how we can bring your ideas on mindfulness that have changed so many lives into our own lives and into the world around us. And I'm not going to suggest we do an introduction to you, Jon, because I think everyone here will know something of your background. I think I'm tempted to start, as well as offering you a very warm welcome, by remembering the title of your first book that I saw, which was called Full Catastrophe Living. And I was always really taken with that title about the full catastrophe of our human experience. I wondered if we could start by maybe reminding ourselves what you meant by that and what it is to be human.
Well, thank you, Mark, and hello, everybody. And it's great to be here. And when I was writing that book, which was basically all about MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, and how somebody was unable to come to our hospital where we were offering this program before it spread around the world. So you either had to take it from us, and this was before Zoom, or the global internet. So you could only get it if you walked into the room in the hospital. And the book was meant to put it out there in a larger sense in the world, as in book form. And I wanted it to actually address the what Zorba the Greek called the full catastrophe of the human condition. So that if we're talking about stress, we're talking about the burdens and pressures and challenges, including the creative possibilities on all human beings, not just the bad stuff, but all of it, including the awful, the intolerable, the immoral, and how do we hold that and work with it in such a way as we optimize well-being and minimize harm? So there's like an ethical dimension to mindfulness that is built into that title, and also the sort of a certain kind of affirmation that we can take on the entirety of the human condition, including all of its underbelly and oppression and injustices that are baked into our institutions, not just to our own individual behaviors. And so that was where the title was meant to be a big umbrella term to cover all of that, so that mindfulness, which is really the heart of Buddhist meditation practice, didn't get reduced to some kind of psychological therapeutic intervention, but was really bringing a multidimensional new approach to medicine and healing, not just of individuals, but of the world ultimately.
Mm. And Jon, I've had the pleasure of being with you a few times with the Action for Happiness community, and I've always remembered that a few things about the very first time we met in London. One was the enormous gratitude that so many people wanted to show to you, because the work that you've done and what you've shared has changed so many lives in really profound ways. But also, you said something then that has always stayed with me about mindfulness being sort of something that is in the laboratory of our daily lives rather than just being a standalone practice, that this is the very essence of every moment of our existence. And that's really had a deep impact on my life. And I feel that mindfulness has become very trendy, but is still seen largely as a thing you might do alongside your busy life. And yet your message has always seemed to me about like life itself is our meditation practice. Is that right?
I couldn't have said it better myself. And that's exactly what I do say, that Yes, it's very important. No matter what's going on in your life, and no matter what the causes and the conditions are that produce suffering, because the agenda or the curriculum is really about human suffering and the
Mm.
possibility of, and I don't use this word lightly, liberation, full liberation from that suffering. That does not mean the entire world will be automatically different and the sources of stress or, sort of social injustice or anything else will just magically disappear. But when you're aligning yourself with that intention in a very small but not insignificant way, when you drop into the present moment in a fully embodied way, the what you might call the the web of the entire universe, the network of the entire universal relationality is transformed because you've shown up in your own life in a way that's both awake and also loving. So I've taken to actually talking about mindfulness both as a formal meditation practice and as a way of being in the world, as a radical act of love and a radical act of sanity. That, for instance, in terms of the formal meditation practice, let's just call it sitting, okay? Although we're talking about lying down, you could stand on your head, you can be doing yoga, a million different ways to do it, walking. But let's just say when you take your seat, on a regular basis as a certain kind of interior discipline. You're not doing it as one more thing you have to do in your busy day and because it's going to reduce your stress or make you feel better. It's because you're taking your seat as a radical act of sanity and love and learning how to what I call drop into the domain of being before you get out there and start doing. And then when you do get out there and start doing in your day, you let that doing come out of your being. That makes life itself the meditation practice. And every one of us will do it differently because every one of us is uniquely different. But there's certain kind of uh, handholds, you might say, or ways of locating yourself and your intentionality that can really support a lifetime of mindfulness in a way that makes a difference not only to your own health and stress and well-being, but makes a difference in your relationships, in the world itself, because you are, in some sense, intentionally serving as a focus of sanity and clarity as opposed to reactivity and self-centeredness. Now, that's a very easy thing for me to be saying. But I think everybody on the call will recognize that it's just about the hardest thing in the world for us human beings to do. And I would say that's why it's worth engaging in this love affair.
So here we are with over 1,000 of us showing up live to, tune into this radical act with you, Jon. Maybe you'd like to just help us discover a moment of that mindfulness together now before we carry on our
Yeah,
conversation.
let's do that. And so wherever you are on the planet, and I assume that you are somewhere on the planet, not necessarily all located in the UK, but wherever you are, take a moment and actually recognize for yourself that you are where you are, or at least you could be if you were open to showing up fully. And probably if you've tuned into this rather than doing all the other busy things you have to do in your day at this moment in time, there's a strong reason for it. So dropping into why you tuned in the first place. And it's not really to hear from Jon Kabat-Zinn, it's to connect with something that maybe I or my name or what I've done represents for you, but that something is magical and it's already in you and it's already complete. And so are you. So can you drop into a sense of being in your body in this moment, in your beauty as a human being, in the fullness of your humanity and the envelope of your skin, right in this moment? No matter whether you're having a bad day or a great day or whatever is going on in your life, just putting out the welcome mat, so to speak, for all of it and just dropping into non-doing, for just a moment and just being with things as they are underneath thinking and all of our ideas and opinions and emotions about what's going on in our lives, and for that matter, what's going on in the world at this moment. It's not a turning away or escaping, but it's like tuning your instrument before you take it out on the road to participate in some kind of musical offering. And so then silence itself becomes coextensive with wakefulness, with embodied wakefulness, with awareness. And that's my definition of mindfulness is it's just pure awareness. So you don't have to acquire it because we're all somehow born with this superpower. But accessing it's another story because sometimes we're so caught up in our thoughts and emotions and reactivity that we lose touch with the present moment and the domain of being. And we're just kind of running around, reacting and lost in thoughts and often turbulent feelings. So, right in this moment, without making anything go away, we're just underneath any turbulence. We're not trying to pacify any turbulence or problematic challenges that we may be facing, or run away from them or deny them. But we're just able to hold all of that in a way that, the ocean is much bigger than the waves at the surface. So this domain of being is the entirety of our humanity, all accessible in this really extraordinary no time that we call now, the present moment. And that we might not only visit more frequently through formal meditation practice and informal meditation practice, but in a very real way, come to inhabit as like what the neuroscientists might call our default mode. So that rather than being on autopilot, we're simply present as we go through life, or remembering and reminding ourselves to be more present when we notice how unpresent or reactive we are. And that's both a practice, a discipline, but it's also a love affair and simply a way with a capital W of being. And what you're trying to attain is already yours. So no need to strive or try to attain anything, but rather to simply recognize that you are already complete, whole, beautiful, valid. You belong. In ways that go beyond description. And in some sense, as was being suggested, already transform the world when you adopt that kind of perspective about yourself. Because the world needs as much clarity and compassion as possible. And you have that potential to be an agent of healing and transformation, not merely in your own life, but in your world, in your family, in your job, in your community. And how you govern yourself in some small way, and maybe even bigger ways than we can imagine, can lead to humanity learning how to govern itself without perpetually killing each other or threatening the environment any more than we've already done. And creating a planet that has a fever at the moment and getting more that way. So you're taking your seat in this way is really a boundless and radical act of sanity, love, and a reflection of your own wholeness, WHOLENESS, and beauty, all underneath thought and story and name and form, right in this moment. And then I don't need to say anything. And in a way, I haven't said anything. I've simply been pointing to aspects of experience that are already intrinsic to you and me and all of us here, and actually all beings. So when you're ready, you might slowly and intentionally draw in a deeper breath. And then when it seems ready, inviting it to just exit the body. If your eyes have been closed, you might open them back to Mark and myself here on the screen and anything else that's in front of you. And I'll just end by saying what a privilege it is to sit together, to practice together in this way. At the moment, it's like 1.4K people all dropping into being together. We all could be doing other things at this particular moment in time, but we've chosen to be here together. That has a tremendous kind of intrinsic power to it that demonstrates, one, that we count, no matter who the we is, who the I, me, and mine is, and also that we're together in a certain way that is mysterious and has enormous potential if we can learn to mobilize that potential and direct it towards healing what needs healing on this planet of ours.
Jon, thank you. That was a really, as you say, a really special experience with so many of us together. Lots of things emerged for me that I'd love to ask you, but actually, I'd love first to turn to the community who've just experienced this moment. And you mentioned pure awareness as part of that
Yeah.
sitting together. And I just wanted to invite everybody here just to maybe share something that came into their awareness while sitting together and having that experience. So if you'd like to take a moment wherever you are in the world right now, just to share a few words in the chat about what came into your awareness during that experience, then maybe I could read a few of those out just to give a sense of what we went through together. So I'll just have a look at the chat. So wholeness, gratitude, peace, how lucky I am, love, connection, don't react to pain. I feel emotional, settling, peace, that I am just enough as I am, slowing down, um, insight, light, completeness, compassion, softening, calmness, mind wandering, permission to just be, emotional, smiles, others together, connection, potential, and so
Holy
much more.
cow.
I can't even read it.
Okay.
So,
Holy
uh,
cow. Let's just take a moment and, let that sink in, because as Thich Nhat Hanh was very fond of saying, we enter are. And when we hear these kinds of expressions of connectivity, it's like looking in the mirror and realizing that we are profoundly connected in a certain way, and we can share in a certain kind of amazement or wonder at how open and expansive the heart can be when it's taking care of itself in a certain way and recognizing its own beauty.
Mm.
And and then that's in a certain way a source of tremendous energy for transforming and healing the world, because there's no point in meditating in a house that's burning down. I mean, you should get out, save everybody, call the fire department, and then if you have a hose, even if it's a small one, throw some water on it. But you don't sit there meditating when the house is on fire. And I'll just say that because I think it's worth emphasizing more and more as we evolve into, it's almost 50 years since MBSR started, 44 or 45 at the moment, that again, the meditation practice is not simply sitting, but it's learning how to inhabit the full dimensionality of awareness. And that may turn out to be our species' signature challenge at the moment, is whether we can inhabit the name we gave ourselves as a species, Homo sapiens sapiens, which, I'll cut to the chase, simply means the species that is aware and is aware that it's aware, namely awareness and meta-awareness. And imagine if we could actually grasp that and instantiate it in the way we conduct our lives, or to use another English word, govern ourselves. And the lawfulness of the Dharma really has a lot to do with how we govern not only ourselves, but how we govern human activity on the planet once we are mindful of, say, the glaciers disappearing. And we're mindful not by sitting on the cushion, but by taking satellite photographs of the glaciers over the past 50 or 60 years and seeing with our very eyes these are disappearing, and also temperature measurements of the ocean and all of that kind of stuff. So mindfulness, has a lot of different levels to it, and they all redound to the beauty of the human heart when it's able to put the welcome mat out to itself.
I'd love us to explore a couple of those levels, actually, Jon. So, in a moment, maybe let's come back to this question of sort of how inner peace can result in outer positive action for the world and for each other. But actually, I want to start back. You mentioned the history of mindfulness-based stress reduction and how long that's been helping people. And to me, the thing that I find so important to remember there is you woke me up, certainly, and many others, to the sort of what I might call the mind-body connection in a really
Yeah.
embodied way. My own background in a stressful corporate job was I had very chronic back pain, and it's now actually 20 years this year since I learnt what is, before I'd ever heard the word mindfulness, I learnt some breathing exercises to allow me to realize that the pain I was holding in my back was muscle tension from stress. And then actually by changing my relationship to that pain, instead of pushing it away, sort of turning towards it and realizing that that was feelings and thoughts that I wasn't really letting out as a sort of classic British male trying to please people and not talk about my feelings. Actually, I went from being in chronic pain, not sleeping, not being able to walk, to functioning again in a very short period of time. And that was, for me, as someone who'd done a PhD in engineering, was very much a rational thinker. That blew my mind
Right.
to understand that these things, this sort of physical reality and our embodied emotional self are so intertwined. Could you say a bit more about, because that feels like MBSR really helped people make this connection between physical health and our whole way of being. Is that
Yeah.
right?
Well, as I said earlier, it really is about suffering and the potential for liberating ourselves from suffering. That doesn't mean that we will live forever, for instance, or never experience emotional pain or physical pain, or because, the classical formulation of mindfulness was it's about, it's about how to approach life in such a way as we're ready for the inevitability of old age, sickness, and death. And nobody so far as I know has escaped that sequence. But how you approach it has everything to do with how it unfolds. So you discovered that what you thought, like back pain, very often, people have multiple surgeries and often they are not successful back surgeries. And so when MBSR got started, it was really the pain clinic in the anesthesia department that sent us all the people that, frankly, they didn't know what to do with anymore because they were what in that medical parlance, failures to treatment. So it's like, okay, now we have a stress reduction clinic. We can dump all those people there and maybe they can help. And in fact, most of the people that they sent us, after 8 weeks, were going back to their, doctors and saying, this program in 8 weeks did more for me than you did for me in 8 years. And the reason for it is because we mobilized their own interior resources for learning something about themselves and their stress and their pain and their back and their minds and their lifestyles. And then from that learning, you why do we ever go to school or learn anything? It's to grow, right? We grow. That's kind of a mystery. Like, what does it even mean to grow? It's not like we're growing taller once we're adults, but we grow potentially wiser or more savvy about our narratives that are too small about ourselves and how we make a lot of trouble for ourselves with, various ways. And then out of that growing, there comes a certain kind of coming to terms with the actuality of things. Like, I'm not going to try to make my back pain go away, but I'm going to just put the welcome mat out to what it actually is in my experience. And I call that healing. That's my working definition of healing, coming to terms with things as they are. But as soon as you do that, you're engaged with the actuality of how things are, and then they change because the only constant in life is change. And this is like ancient Buddhist wisdom and even earlier than Buddhism. And as a result of that change, there's transformation, and you have a realization that you're much bigger than your story of me and how much my back is killing me or all of that. And then all of a sudden, you've come full circle and there's more learning, more growing, more healing, and that becomes your default mode, your way of living. And it doesn't mean you won't die, and it doesn't mean you won't have very serious health problems or pain or anything else, but it does mean that you'll have a potentially infinite way of holding it that attenuates the suffering or liberates the suffering and gives access to a sense of well-being and gratitude that's beyond liking and disliking. And that I would call wisdom. And what MBSR showed is like anybody can do that. Everybody can do that. You don't have to be a monastic in some monastery on a mountaintop in Asia. That anybody can take these ancient practices and instantiate them in their lives in ways that show just often the kinds of benefits that you were reporting from your own experience.
Jon, I've always loved that phrase you said about the welcome mat, but you've just helped me see it in a new way, which is remembering that in my case, that chronic pain was made worse by the fear of the pain and the implications. And in fact, a welcome mat in some ways is an acceptance that helps get rid of some of the fear and allow things to be,
right,
and actually allows us to then move on.
And the first thing I would ask you, if we were working together in that kind of a way, is how does the fear express itself in your body right in this moment? Okay, so that's a kind of subtracting the head from the equation, and we're asking you to directly perceive how the fear is operating. Where is it in the body? And then you're outside of the domain of cognition, and that's a kind of other perspective that you can bring to it, and all of a sudden you have new degrees of freedom for being in wise relationship to it. And then you basically uncouple the sensory, the emotional, and the what's called nociceptive or physical domains of pain, and you uncouple them, and all of a sudden the suffering drops. The sensation may change, but not completely disappear. But over time, the body begins to learn how to navigate that universe and come to terms with the actuality of things. And they're continually changing. So that's the love affair. And your body and the world will teach you everything you need to know if you're open to listening.
So let's shift from that level of the body to the level of the world. And where I want to start with this is this really powerful idea of acceptance that we've just talked about for our own sort of lived reality feels sometimes at odds with, as you described, the really kind of on fire situation we find in the world around us. We look at the climate challenge, we look at war, we look at suffering, and actually acceptance somehow feels like it's not enough. Like acceptance somehow needs to link back to action.
Yeah.
So I wondered if you could say a bit about how cultivating this inner peace can allow us not just to wish for outer peace, but to actually live in and act in ways that help call out the things that are wrong and actually become a sort of force for compassionate living as well as just inner wisdom.
Well, my grandson was wearing a T-shirt the other day with a quote from Angela Davis, which took that classical aspiration of let me learn to change the things that I can change in my life, not change the things that I cannot change, and know the difference. And she said, let me learn to change the things that I cannot accept in the world, and not accept the things that I can, that have to be accepted, and know the difference. So I think that's turning everything on its head and saying, no, there are aspects of the world that are sources of deep suffering. And they've been at play for as long as there's been history, at least. So at least 15,000 years or something like that. And which is not very long when you think about generations. So you could think of humanity in an evolutionary way as just learning how to grow into its full capacities, and hopefully learn not to kill each other. And Yuval Noah Harari has, in his work and his books are sort of really explaining the amazing advent of humanity and how it has transformed the earth, but also since, and he's a very, committed meditator, how our potential for awareness has the capacity to actually transform the story. So if we just pay a lot of attention to the things we tell ourselves about the way reality is, we can wind up believing them. And, there's this kind of cliche, don't believe everything you think. My philosophy is really don't believe anything you think, because thinking isn't all that cracked up to you, or at least test it a lot, because a lot of our thoughts are highly socially conditioned. And so when it comes to transforming the world, we really have to listen to voices that are very different from our own, because we are highly conditioned by whatever our historical history, what the color of our skin, what the sort of country we happen to be born into, levels of privilege in society, all of that kind of stuff has to be part of the curriculum of mindfulness in order for us to not wind up becoming caricatures of mindfulness, and where there's no wisdom, and there's actually an awful lot of implicit and explicit exploitation and suffering that's not being recognized as people talk about how important it is to be self-aware.
Mm.
So it is a big challenge for us as humanity. And as I said, I feel like that's a challenge for us as a species at the moment, is can we make it over the next whatever period of time, 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, to a place where we live our way into the species name, and we begin to recognize that everybody's life is equal to everybody else's. And everybody, if you take the analogy of the human body, with the trillions and trillions of cells in the human body, every single cell needs an adequate blood supply, or you're going to have disease of one kind or another. So in the same way, if humanity, if we are all individually cells of the one body politic of the human species, then it stands to reason that everybody has to have an adequate blood supply in order to be able to live effectively. So whether that's a sort of minimal basic income or whatever it is, that we have to eradicate poverty, we have to eradicate, we have to eradicate sort of institutional injustices because they are sources of harm and suffering, and they privilege some and benefit some at the expense of others. And it's amazing how the privileged very often are completely blind to the privilege of privilege, so to speak, because that's the world, that the waters that you swim in, just like the fish are blind to the water potentially. So we need each other to help us wake up. I mean, I mean, just in our families, we know that luckily the people who love us are our best, sort of exponents for showing us what we don't know. And so people who don't look like us, people who live in different places in the world, who have experienced different forces of oppression or injustice, we need to listen to those voices so that we do actually thread that needle and heal the planet before the forces of classically greed, hatred, and delusion and separation and othering destroy it.
John, without wanting to go into a sort of current affairs discussion, I noticed as just one example of the sort of many human suffering instances around our world. I saw that you posted something on Twitter X the other day around Gaza and the awful suffering that's happening there and the Dharma community's response to that. And I don't want to necessarily go into the politics of that question, but what I think many of us would really benefit from hearing with all of your wisdom is how do you, as a mindful practitioner and a compassion promoting human being, respond to what's going on, in a situation like Gaza right now? How do you balance that sort of, your
Well,
own practice and sort of the
the
message
short
that you want to
answer
give to
would
the
be
world?
the short answer, and thank you for asking the question. The short answer would be any way I can, and any way that I can will be inadequate. I mean, and I want to recognize that everything is set in motion by causes and conditions. So what happened on October 7th was absolutely horrifying. And, just like mass murder on a scale that had not been seen ever in Israel, up to that point. But it didn't come out of a vacuum. And in fact, Israeli, intelligence was saying that something like this is going to happen, but there was a certain, I think, degree of unbelievability to it. No, that could never happen. We're too strong and the walls are too high and the barbed wire is too, and all of a sudden the unthinkable happened. It's almost like, so there are these hostages that are now in Gaza. A lot of people died. I mean, just horrifyingly. And it was almost like, the way I see it is, this is the result of like historical causes and conditions that are at least 100 years old and that have to do with, how the world relates to Judaism, and how Europe related to Judaism in the 19th and early 20th centuries, and the non-recognition of the Palestinian people who are occupying the land of Palestine, and how things unfolded with the Balfour Declaration and everything else. So not to go into it in any great detail, but there are intrinsic contradictions in that area of the Middle East and in Israel that got papered over by the UN, by the US, by the UK, and by England, let's say, and we're seeing the results of that 100 years later. And if anybody wants to pursue it, Khalidi wrote professor at Columbia University, wrote a very beautiful and illuminating book called The 100-Year War of Palestine. So all of these things come out of, again, causes and conditions. And so from the point of view of October 7th, I saw it as a kind of horrifying koan that the causes and conditions in the form of Hamas threw out to Israel. Okay, the world is not the way you thought it was, and you are not as safe as you thought it was. Now what? And I think Netanyahu and people who are in charge of Israel at the moment, I think they really blew it by murdering, so many thousands of babies and women and children, and destroying schools and everything else. Understanding the rationale that there might be tunnels underneath and terrorists hiding in schools and hospitals and everything. But was that the wisest solution, is to kill people to the level where everybody around the world is in some kind of moral compromise and hazard, because we see it on social media and on television every single day? Babies, little bodies wrapped up or amputated and everything else. And we're drinking this in. And what kind of power do we have to influence it all? So that's why we're seeing all these uprisings on college campuses, because it's morally hazardous to actually, sort of just stand there and observe it without saying anything. And so this is part of the curriculum, I think, of what I said earlier about humanity learning how to live its way into the name we gave ourselves as a species. And if we're really aware of these different levels, then how to heal and govern the Middle East and every place else in the world that's contentious, including Ukraine, Russia, and everything else, where we're just killing ourselves because they are us. We're all human beings. And that's, I think, the karmic assignment of humanity at the moment, is to either wake up and recognize our commonality and find ways to govern ourselves, which is a root meaning of the word dharma, so that we optimize well-being and minimize as much as possible harming, even though we recognize that we're all capable of tremendous harm. I don't know if that makes any sense to you.
It makes a lot of sense,
I'm
John.
saying it
And
off the top of my head, and
sorry, I was going to say what's really strikes me listening to you with that kind of mindful lens on is your ability to hold an incredibly complex and nuanced and multidimensional theme in a way that recognizes the full catastrophe of our situation and our humanity and
yeah.
our shared, we are in some ways our own enemies, and there's our response is not a helpful one. And I wish more of the conversation in the media and in social media was along the lines of what you've just shared, which is kind of looking at this with a wise, heartfelt view. But I also want to be conscious of our time together now, and actually invite the audience to use the Q&A function to put their questions that they'd like to ask. And in a moment, I'll come to those. But just to sort of bridge from what we've just talked about, which of course brings up some really difficult emotions. Certainly I'm feeling that for me personally. Could you say a bit more about the kind of common humanity, this sense of oneness that we would love to recognize more, and actually in some ways could be a solution to the conflict we have in our world?
Well, I think, I think we all as human beings recognize the humanity of others. And governments and countries basically are aimed at instantiating certain kinds of boundary conditions so that we optimize, our ability to live together on this planet. But then there are the classical elements of greed, hatred, and delusion that have actually, the greed part is like, hey, well, why don't we just grab your land? Why should it be your land? I have more guns, I'll take it. That's been going on for a very long time. And I think that's the kind of thing that we need to actually take a look at as a species, as humanity, and say, no, we're going to have to outlaw certain things like, ability to grab each other's land or to make those kinds of claims, and then to threaten humanity with Armageddon, nuclear weapons, and stuff like that. So I feel like we really need to inquire together about whether it's Ukraine and Russia. It's like, what is our common self-interest, and how much has it been being driven by leaders who are not in touch with maybe healing their own countries, but utilizing their geopolitical power for their own, for the gain of a small number of people. I think China has tremendous potential here in this regard, especially if it, in terms of Taiwan. I mean, the same threat is there for Taiwan, that was there for Russia and Ukraine. Okay, and there's a lot of geopolitical posturing around that. But if China could get in touch with its own ancient Dharma roots, which I think it is more and more and more, there's no telling what would happen if one country, perhaps China, actually got in touch with its deep wisdom dimension. I mean, mindfulness may be like 50 years old in the West, but it's thousands of years old in China. Their Dharma history is second to none on the planet, and how it's manifested in terms of art and all sorts of various kinds of institutions, and poetry, and so I think there is tremendous potential on the planet on every continent for us to actually come to our senses, which was the title of a book that I wrote about this. Come to our senses, wake up as human beings. And again, I'm not saying this is going to be easy. It's going to take a lot of collective inquiry and also rewriting injustices that are thousands of years old, but coming to a place where we learn to live in harmony with the universe, because we're the only planet we know of where there is life in the form of us and consciousness, so sentience. And actually, I mean, there's a book that a physicist wrote recently called The Dawning of a Mindful Universe. And I think that that's actually a prescription for one possible outcome on this planet, which would be a happy one. The other possible outcomes, if we're talking about, I don't even want to go there in terms of the level of violence that we're capable of.
But this is, I think, where the personal and the global re-link again, John, which I'm reminded of this idea that the people who do the most unloving things are the people most in need of love, and the people who do the least wise things in many ways are the people least in touch with their inner wisdom. And therefore, I feel it's so important that we can help people in positions of power and influence, particularly to develop this way of mindful living.
Or get them out of there and get other people into positions of power.
Yeah, or replace.
Because I don't think you're going to be, transforming Putin or Donald Trump or anybody else anytime soon.
No, but I was with someone, I think Chris Ruan, who
I love Chris
member of Parliament in the UK, who has been trying to encourage parliamentarians to do mindfulness, and I believe that can be really transformative. But let's bring it back to the personal as we turn to the questions from the community here. So Dave's asked, or just said, "Hi John, I use your guided meditations to help me most mornings. I feel great afterwards, but find it really hard to bring mindfulness into my day after that, especially when I'm having a busy day at work. What's the best way to become more mindful outside of the actual meditation practice?"
Take the moments when you're having a hard time at work, take one by one, and recognize that you're having a hard time at work. That's awareness. And once you're in awareness, then I'm having a hard time at work just becomes a thought or a story. And you can change that story instantly by holding it in awareness. And you can even ask the question, is my awareness having a hard time? And therefore, you're really recruiting a hidden dimension of your own humanity. And you can play with it like a yoga exercise. You can sort of move in, move out, play with it and explore. Like say you're having a hard time with a colleague or a boss or, whatever it is. How could you do something like orthogonal, like beyond what you usually think of as like, reacting or responding, that would actually maybe at least maintain your own integrity, even if it doesn't change the situation. And that's a form of meditation. That's meditation in action. And then see what happens in the next moment, new opportunity.
Thank you. Alice asks, do you have any tips specifically for those of us with ADHD or similar sort of fast multi-tab brains, as she calls it?
I think from a certain perspective, not to, at all diminish a diagnosis like that. The entire planet has, entire humanity has ADHD big time. So I think the prescription is the same. As best you can, see if you can inhabit this moment. And then ask yourself, in this moment, is my awareness of my anxiety anxious? And you may find that there's all sorts of anxious thoughts in there about the future or the next moment or whatever, but your awareness in this moment of the anxiety is not anxious. And you can feel where the anxiety is in your body, just as we discussed a little bit earlier. How is it expressing in my body? And then let it be and breathe with it and don't take it personally. So there's a certain way in which it's helpful to try to see how often we take things personally and build stories around my anxiety or this or that, and then let it be more like a weather pattern, like it's anxiousing the way it's raining, and it's not you, and you don't need to worry about it in quite the same way, and see how that works over a period of a few months. But I think it's actually a very powerful meditation practice to actually embrace it, put the welcome mat out for, as was said earlier, and investigate whether you are your anxiety or that's another story you're telling yourself that's somewhat limiting.
Thank you, so helpful. Tenzin's asked a question, which I think brings us back to the overarching theme of today's event, Jon, about everyday mindfulness. He asks, what advice do you have for individuals struggling to establish a consistent mindfulness practice? How do we make this every day, I guess?
Get your ass on the cushion every single day, whether you feel like it or not. I say that, playfully, but I'm also not kidding. If you really have the energy to ask that question, then you have the energy to do it. Somebody in there wanted to ask that question because they want some kind of enthusiastic answer from me that will make sense to you. I would say trust where the question came from that you're asking me. Trust that, listen to it, and then let that guide how you conduct yourself from the moment you wake up and realize you're awake. I've been advocating more and more for people to say, well, it's hard for me to get out of bed and then go to the meditation cushion and sit, or a chair or whatever I'm sitting on. I said, don't bother getting out of bed. This is something I wouldn't have said when I was younger, but as I get older, it's like, just meditate in bed, get into the corpse pose and die to the past, die to the future, and wake up in the present moment. And you can do it by feeling the sensations in your toes and in your feet and in your ankles and heels, or the sensations in your hands. And then play with, like, can I feel my left foot in my left hand? And awareness of the sensations, okay? And I feel now, can I shift to the awareness of my right foot and my right hand? And you can make this stuff up, but they're all different doors into the same room. And that room is awareness in this present moment. And so I like to say, when you wake up in the morning, check and see whether it's really true, and then finish the job before you get out of bed. It shouldn't take that long either. It doesn't mean you have to sit for half an hour. You have to practice for half an hour, like one in breath and one out breath, if that's all you have. But I would say, longer stretches of clock time are really powerful for deep healing.
But you're reminding me of something you once said when we were together in London, which has always stuck with me when I have a shower in the morning. You said, when you're in the shower in the morning, just make sure, you're there in the shower and you haven't brought all your colleagues from the meeting you're going to into, which I thought was
Excuse me.
A lovely image.
That may be one of the signature things I'm most known for, is the shower.
Carol has asked an interesting question about grief. She said after her husband died suddenly and unexpectedly, she found mindfulness really helped navigate the depths of grief. And that's actually transformed the pain into a cherished memory. But grief is not something we talk about openly in our culture. So how can we encourage people to use mindfulness as part of the grieving process?
By having grief be more of in the culture, explicitly, by sharing our grief, by holding it. It's part of the human condition. It's horrible. It's absolutely horrible. Loss, the law of impermanence at work, the unexpected happening, the unimaginable happening. And this is why, I teach mindfulness. I mean, if I found something more powerful, more self-compassionate, more embracing than mindfulness, I would be actually advocating that. But I haven't in the entirety of my life. So when we are experiencing the grief of loss, especially sudden loss, and we're seeing it played out, as I was saying, on our television screens and our news feeds every day, like thousands and thousands of people experiencing that in their families in Gaza, then and in what happened in Israel, and in what's going on in Ukraine. It's like a certain kind of recognizing that this is the human condition, that we are not immune to suffering, but that we can really put out the welcome mat for that suffering and investigate it and learn from it in a certain way how to heal ourselves. And I would say be a force for sanity and healing in the world. And in small is beautiful. So it doesn't have to be some big thing that has to do with Gaza or Ukraine. It just has to do with who's still left in your world that merits recognition and love.
And what I loved about that question was how that use of mindfulness had allowed grief to also bring a sense of gratitude and celebration as well, which I think is something that it opens up in a way for us, that broader
Yeah.
perspective of being able to, in some ways, the welcome that allows us to discover the depth and the richness
But you
that comes
can't
along
push
with it.
that either. I think it's also important to respect that when, it's that grief has a certain kind of time signature. And in the early stages of grief, like in the Greek choruses, you just pull your hair out and scream and rant and yell. And that's also part of being human. It's like, and have it be completely unacceptable. And so to be kind to oneself and not sort of impose some kind of prescription about how you have to do grief, but let the grief do you in a certain way. And if you're cultivating mindfulness, then grief becomes a profound teacher about our common humanity and our vulnerability, and the beauty of our relationships and their evanescence.
And I think actually so much of what you said today, John, is a reminder of how precious life is. That this one moment that we ever have right now, and the uniqueness of our experience and our connection to each other, is a really precious thing. Then somehow mindful living is a celebration of that heartful, loving way of living. Do you feel that too? That kind of sense of life being precious?
Absolutely. And that's why this moment is the only moment. It's precious and it's the only one we have. Everything else is story, future or past. And we can build the stories however we want them. But the most important thing is to, uh, all those stories are about the story of me, okay? And we need to inquire who that me is because, in a certain way, we are so much bigger than our stories.
Mm.
And that's where awareness comes in. Try to find the center or the periphery or the circumference of your own awareness. You won't find it. Uh, and so that's big. That's actually as big as the universe because it's the only property that we have that's similar to the universe, namely, there's no center to the universe as it's understood by astrophysicists and cosmologists, and there's no periphery, there's no end to it. And awareness is like that, and we're born, I don't even want to say with it. It is us in a certain way. It's our core signature feature, and yet we're not that comfortable with it or intimate with it, and we can develop that kind of intimacy. And that's what meditation is, both in daily life and informal meditation practice, until there's no separation between formal meditation practice and us speaking together like this. And as soon as we go off Zoom, the meditation continues forever, as long as the breath continues, at least.
John, we're out of time, but I'd love to invite you to just to join us for 30 seconds in something we do at the end of our Action for Happiness gatherings. We call the checkout. And what we're going to first of all do, wherever you are in the world, just take a moment to breathe and reconnect with that sense of awareness and notice what's going on for you right now. And bring to mind something you appreciate about this time we've spent together with Jon. Perhaps an idea that's really resonated, or an intention that you want to set yourself having spent this time together. And finally, let's take that sense of appreciation and the wisdom that we've heard from Jon together today and actually send this out into the world, really cultivate a sense of well-wishing and love and compassion, especially for those in the world that really need this right now, where people are dealing with really difficult situations and suffering. So our hearts are with them, and we're sending out a sense of, wishing them well wherever they are in the world. Jon, we're enormously grateful to you. It's been a real joy to spend this time with you. Is there a final thought you'd like to leave us with as we part today?
Well, I just feel honored to be part of this conversation. And just a deep bow to all of you who are on this call. And let's remember, or let's see if we can explore what I was suggesting when I was calling mindfulness a love affair with life and with the world and with our possibilities for living life as if it really, really mattered in the only moment we ever have. So it's a big adventure. There may be plenty of wrong ways to do it, but there's no one right way to do it. And so as long as you trust in your own deep intentionality and beauty, that motivation is just perfect. And then every moment becomes your teacher. Everything that arises becomes your teacher. The world, actually, life itself becomes your mindfulness teacher. And then we also reflect that back like mirrors to each other. So I love that. I absolutely love that. And I feel, Mark, I want to just say tremendously honored to be invited back into your community, your Sangha, we might call it. And to just say that I feel like this is a force that has the potential to transform the world, and the stakes are so high that every one of us needs to, in some way or other, show up on our full humanity. I like to say, quoting Buckminster Fuller, that this is a all hands on deck moment on Spaceship Earth, and every one of us counts. So, all best wishes to all of you, and we'll keep practicing together. I'll see you on the cushion.
We will
In
keep
my
practicing
mind.
together. Thank you everyone for being here, and Jon, thanks again. It's been a real pleasure being together, and we will see you in mindful living and on the cushion. Thank you all.
Bye bye.